what does Mailchimp do? What does an engineer at Mailchimp do? And how did you get this job?
Okay, before I talk about Mailchimp, I just want to say I think it's so cool that I'm on the podcast right now, because when I first started listening a year and a half ago, I just kind of like envisioned myself one day sitting here having this conversation with you. So this
Things
is really
are coming
awesome.
full circle.
I love it.
Love it.
I think my mom said like a goal without a plan is just a wish or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
But
and
you had a
That's true.
goal to break in, and you knew if you broke in, you would make it to our podcast.
yeah, we're gonna talk about how you
yeah.
made that plan in a second. But yeah, so Mailchimp.
So Mailchimp. Wait, what was the original question?
Yeah, so tell us about Mailchimp. Like, what's Mailchimp? What does an engineer do here? And how did you get the job?
So Mailchimp is a marketing automation platform.
Yeah.
We started off focused primarily on email.
Yeah.
So email marketing, a lot of the emails that you get from different companies, you probably don't realize that they're actually using Mailchimp.
Mm-hmm.
And Mailchimp is starting to branch off into other forms of marketing as well.
Mm-hmm.
And our mission is to help small business owners grow and essentially be able to compete with larger, wealthy corporations.
Yeah. And I think something that's interesting about Mailchimp is their startup. But did they raise venture capital money or not raise venture capital money?
No, they didn't. And actually, Mailchimp is no longer a startup. Mailchimp is 17 years old.
Wow.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Mailchimp has been around for a while.
Flex.
Yeah. What's really interesting is they started off a little bit different. So they weren't a email. They didn't go into what they do now right away. It's been a very slow uphill, I think, journey for Mailchimp, and the majority of growth has happened in the last, I believe, 3 years.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. And so, like, for the people that thought that they were only in Atlanta, I know you all started this Oakland office. Are you all in any other areas, or if this is your main focus, like, why did you guys decide to go to Oakland?
Yeah. So Mailchimp has our headquarters in Atlanta. The company as a whole is, I think we just hit over 800 people.
Wow.
And a year ago, they decided to open satellite offices in Oakland and Brooklyn.
Got it.
And the idea was that they wanted to be able to tap into other talent pools that were outside of Atlanta.
So that's how they found you. Super
Yes.
talented,
Exactly.
not in Atlanta, but you have ties to the South.
Yes, I do. I do. And actually, I hope to move to Atlanta one day.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
And when it comes to Mailchimp, for those of you who never heard, Mailchimp powers like newsletter lists that you get, so you can customize email templates, and it sounds like something simple to do, but there are 800 people building it. So Iris, can you describe the types of roles and the types of I guess initiatives that go behind the scenes to create something like Mailchimp happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have the engineering team. You also have marketing. We don't have a sales team, which is we've been able to accomplish what we have without having a sales team. There's also like legal and all of that. But within engineering, most of the teams are split up based on like a feature or like a portion of the application. So you have like automations, for example, you have landing pages. You also have teams that work on the operations side, which is more like infrastructure focused. You have teams that focus on literally just the send process, because we send over 1 billion emails a day.
That's crazy.
Yes.
1 billion a day?
1 billion emails a day.
Wow, we're talking about helping 1 billion people in 10 years. 1 billion a day. That's impressive.
So, there's a lot when you're dealing with that amount of communication, the efficiency of your code is really important.
Got it. So that's super interesting. And so, you all are hiring engineers, and you all are broken down by teams. I know you graduated from a coding bootcamp. We're going to talk about that later. But how did you, get the job at Mailchimp?
Yeah. So, what's interesting is when I applied to Mailchimp, I thought that they were just like a backup like they were a practice company. So they were one of the first companies that I applied to. I saw their posting on, I believe, like Greenhouse or something like that. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to practice with them and, and use this to apply to other companies that I really want to work at. So I sent in my application, and then I found a recruiter or the head of talent at Mailchimp on LinkedIn. And I messaged them and I said, hey, like I applied, here's a little bit about me. Could you put me in touch with someone who would be like directly, responsible for my process? So they put me in touch with the recruiter for the Oakland office.
Yep.
And her and I spoke on the phone. And at that time, there were only 3 people in this office.
Yeah.
And so we spoke on the phone and she was like, look, we're not thinking of hiring junior engineers right now. Like we're not necessarily in a position where we think we're prepared for that.
Yeah.
But I really like your story. There's something about you. So let me go talk to our senior director and see what he says.
Interesting.
Yeah. Do you remember what you told them your story was?
I mean, I told them the story that folks will hear tonight.
Yeah. And we'll come back to that just because like the not getting hired because you're a junior engineer is a common answer for a lot of people that are even graduated from college with a CS degree and they struggle telling their story properly. And applying to a recruiter sounds like the standard process, and that's a very typical story, but your story is far, far from typical. Mm-hmm. So why don't we start unpacking how Mailchimp actually sparked your desire to get into coding back when you were in Florida, before we even met?
Mm-hmm. Essentially, I was teaching back in South Florida, and I was also helping to run a social justice organization called Black Lives Matter Alliance Broward, aka The Alliance.
Okay.
And I realized that we were not being very effective, or not being as effective as we had wanted to be. We didn't have any formal like systems or processes for bringing people in. Mm-hmm. So we weren't growing the way that we needed to grow. Mm-hmm. And so the work was just too much for the people it was just a lot of strain, a lot of burnout.
Yeah.
So I had proposed an initiative to implement a bunch of systems and processes to help change all of that.
Yeah.
And one of those things was an intake process for new people, and kind of like a whole new like recruitment engagement process.
Yeah.
Which was actually very successful. Within about 2 months, we were able to double the size of our membership.
Flex.
And one of the so we doubled the size of our membership, which means that we eliminated one problem, but we created a new problem, which is like now, more work. Now we have more people in our group, but now we also have a contact list of like 1,000 people.
Okay.
And, we have to reach out to all these people, and we all have to track everyone that's in our organization currently or who's coming in.
Yeah.
And so one of the new recruits had suggested that we get a Mailchimp account, and use that to help automate the emails that we were sending out, and also to make the emails more appealing and prettier, and more likely for people to open them. But also Mailchimp does a lot to kind of like
help you manage the flow
and tag like emails that bounce back and things like that. Otherwise, we would have to manually go in and like update emails that bounce and things. It was just a lot.
Yeah.
And she was also able to write a script that connected our contact database that was in Google Sheets, and she connected it to Mailchimp.
Yeah.
And this script made it so that both like the Mailchimp list would update automatically once a week based on how we had updated the Google Sheets list, and vice versa.
And that blew your mind.
And this blew my mind because this eliminated a bunch of work.
Yeah.
That
Jobs
I was
going away.
Yeah. So I was like, oh man, this is amazing.
Yeah.
So I was like, so this was really kind of like the start. This is where the light bulb went off, and this is where I kind of realized the power of technology.
Yeah.
So from there, I continued looking for other applications that we could use to automate other processes.
Yeah.
And some things I found were great. Some things were not enough.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, if only I could just build exactly what I needed for my organization.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have to pay the,
outsource the work.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we'll go back into like what you did with organizing, what it stands for, and the leadership with the Alliance later. But I think it's important to unpack this just because there's a lot of organizations that are doing really good work for the community, like nonprofits and just social justice organizations that want to be efficient, but don't realize that a lot of the work that they're doing is manual, repetitive, and could be more efficient if they learn some of these principles that you started to get excited about. So
absolutely,
and through your work, you went to school and you met some people that introduced you to an alternative form of education. So, or just education. What was that?
Yeah. So I'm realizing what technology, like software, is specifically. And I'm realizing what coding is because I wasn't familiar with those terms. I didn't grow up around tech. No one in my family is an engineer. None of my close friends are engineers. So it was like a foreign world to me.
Yeah.
So there was a friend that I had graduated college with. Her name is Blake.
Shout out to Blake.
And we had been catching up on the phone one day, and she had mentioned that she did an engineering program. And at the time I was like, oh, cool. But I had no idea what it really was. Yeah. So now, so that was like way back. So now I'm like interested in learning how to code, and I'm realizing that program that she did is probably similar to what I would need. Yeah. So I called her and I told her my story, and I asked her about the program she did. She broke it down. She explained what a boot camp was. She explained the whole setup. She explained what front end and back end is. And essentially I was like, this is exactly what I need to do. Yeah. Like, I need to do this exact same thing.
Yeah.
So take us back to like that moment. So you're in Florida, right? You're working as a teacher, and outside of work, you're running this organization, and you realize that there's this whole other world of coding out there and coding boot camps. So take us back to the moment, and like what was that like? And when you had that realization, like what were some of the feelings you were going through, and like concerns, like excitement, like share it with our audience?
I think the main emotion was definitely excitement. It was like a whole new world of opportunity and possibilities had been exposed to me. And so I just started reimagining everything, like reimagining the way that I would do activism, reimagining the way that I could live my life as a teacher. You know, our salaries are not very high. There isn't much opportunity for growth in terms of income. So it was like, man, not only is this a world where if I get into it, I can take the skills that I learn and help activists and help movements and help change the world, but I can also give myself a better life and give my family a better life. So I was just like, this is absolutely amazing. Yeah. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I want to figure it out.
And I think a lot of people who find out about boot camps, they get excited, they start taking online courses, and they give up. I think one of the main reasons comes down to time management. And it sounds like when you found out about coding bootcamps, you had a full-time job being a teacher, which I'm sure you have to work late and you have to grade papers. Then you were running your own organization, and now you want to learn how to code. So how do you manage that? And did you have to make any sacrifices?
Yeah. So it was a lot. And I did have to make a lot of sacrifices. I think one of the first things that I had to do was tell my friends, my family, and also my boyfriend that I wasn't going to be able to spend time with them for at least a period of time. So especially my partner, I think that was one of the hardest parts, because I'd come home late and it's like, we haven't seen each other all day. Yeah. And instead of like hanging out and watching a TV show or cuddling or whatever, I'm like there on the laptop, studying. Yeah.
Sacrifices.
I had to, I couldn't go out with my friends as much or at all really. And also I had to save. I had to develop this whole savings plan, and in developing the savings plan, I realized that I had no room to spend any money outside of like necessities. So no going out, no buying drinks, no
eating brunch.
eating brunch,
Yeah.
like no going out to with friends
Yeah.
for dinner or
Yeah.
brunch and things like that.
Movie theaters.
And other recreational activities
Yeah.
that
Had to cut it off.
I had to cut it all out. Yeah.
And so when you were budgeting, like, so obviously there's tuition, but what other things were you budgeting for as well?
Yeah. So you have to budget for housing, you have to budget for food, but also you have to budget for your bills. I have a car, I have student loans. You know, I have a Netflix account.
Yeah, Netflix is important.
Right? Like, you know, you have all these things
Yeah.
that you can't just stop paying them because you don't have a job.
Yeah.
So I had to say, okay, how much money do I need to go to a boot camp? And then how much money do I need to pay my rent? And then how much money do I need to pay all of my bills? I had already gone through a period of economic instability where I wasn't able to make all of my payments on time, and it ruined my credit.
Wow.
And I had just gone through the process of working really hard to bring my credit back up.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to go back to bad credit
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And how many months did you budget for?
I budgeted for I believe I budgeted for a year. It was
Yeah.
like a 1-year plan.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Personal runway, and like I know you mentioned that, you know, you had to speak with your loved ones about that, the fact that you're going to disappear essentially, and focus to make the sacrifice to give yourself more time in the future and essentially change everyone's life. But, you know, did they believe you? Did they push back? Did they, you know, get upset about it?
No, not at all. My friends and my family were very supportive.
Oh wow.
My partner was very supportive. I think that my parents at first maybe were a little, I mean, they would never say this, but I
Yeah.
think they were a little skeptical because throughout my life, there have been different things that I wanted to do. And then I come up with like this big idea, and then, you know, I don't actually do it, or like 2 weeks later, I change my mind. So
Yeah.
I think they were like, okay, let's see if she's actually serious about this.
Yeah.
But no, I think I had the privilege of having a very strong support group around me throughout that process. No one ever made me feel guilty for not being able to hang out. Like it was a really good,
Yeah.
positive
That's
situation.
amazing.
So a lot of people, I guess a lot of people have the vision, they get excited, but then a lot of people start out and start doubting that this is even possible. Because going from a teacher to becoming an engineer, like that, it is a huge transition. So what made you believe that that was possible?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. I think self-esteem and believing in yourself is really important. And that is something that I had struggled with at times, and I had especially struggled with in college and right after I graduated. And so I had gone through a period of trying to figure out how to develop self-esteem again. And honestly, I think going into teaching, which I was very good at, you know, I went into teaching, and I was able to do better than a lot of teachers who had been teaching for 10, 15, 20 years as like a brand new teacher. And it was still challenging, but I was able to figure it out. And I think that finding something that I was good at and I was able to have success in gave me a certain level of self-esteem that allowed me to believe that I could take on even harder tasks. I think the other big thing was listening to the Breaking Into Startups podcast, which I started listening to around shortly after I made my first draft of my 1-year plan. And I think hearing the stories of people who've done exactly what I'm trying to do was very reinforcing, because it made it very clear that this is not some sort of like, you know, magical, you know, it's not trying to make it to the NBA.
Yeah.
You know, there's a formula. If you follow the formula, you will be successful.
Fact.
You will make it. Like,
Yeah.
there's no way that you won't.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm going to listen to all the advice that I can, figure out what this formula is, and then follow it. And that's what I
amazing.
did.
So
That's
you build
amazing.
yourself a roadmap, because I remember there was a time when you posted in our group and you were actually one of the first people who started listening to the podcast and started being active in our group. You actually laid out a plan for like what you needed to do in terms of timeline, in terms of getting into the boot camp. Can you kind of describe to our listeners what your plan was once you started like taking steps towards the end goal?
Yeah. So my plan was essentially a 1-year plan. And I actually I actually met that 1 year plan I was a little late, literally by like 3 weeks.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's hella dope.
Yeah,
That's accurate.
it's really cool. So the plan was to spend a few months saving and studying.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had researched a bunch of boot camps, like, put all of the info on different boot camps into like a spreadsheet, figured out which ones I was interested in, figured out what their deadlines were for applications, what their cost was, and I identified the ones that I wanted to apply to and the date that I needed to apply by.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I knew, okay, I knew that I needed to study from January to about March, and that April I needed to start applying to programs so that I could get into a June, July-ish program.
Yeah.
And then I knew that program would take about 3 months. It ended up taking 4 months, the program that I ended up doing, which is part of the reason why my plan had to be adjusted.
Yeah.
But
We'll talk about it later.
So I knew about 3 months for the program, and then I knew that the average job hunt was 3 months for people graduating from boot camps.
Yeah.
Although actually I found out later that the average is closer to 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of boot camps were kind of touting the 3 month number.
Yeah.
So I said, look, I'm going to be better than average. So I'm
Yeah.
going to get a job before 3 months is
Yeah.
over.
Yeah. That's like confidence and the belief in yourself. Yep.
So I set 3 months of school, 3 months of job hunting, and all of that together put me at a year.
Yeah.
So the goal was to have a job by January 2018.
That's amazing. And we always talk about how if you fail a plan to fail. And so you described how you started laying out all these boot camps in a spreadsheet, which is a common thing that people struggle with, is identifying which boot camp to go to, which is why we're addressing that with Career Karma. But then, at that time, and I remember when Timur and Artur were doing the same thing, trying to choose which boot camp to go into, there's a certain bar that you have to achieve in order to get into these programs.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to prepare to get into these programs. And back then they didn't have prep courses like they do now. So what did you do in order to start teaching yourself to get a basic proficiency in a coding language? Did you know what a coding language was at the time?
Yeah. So I didn't know much. I kind of figured from my research that I needed to do HTML and CSS, that those were kind of like the basics.
Mm-hmm.
And I found a course. So I started doing HTML and CSS on Code Academy.
Okay.
And actually one of the mistakes that I made earlier on was I think I would have learned a lot more if I knew this. So I'm going to share this advice.
Okay.
Is I was like, oh man, I'm going to take detailed notes. So a 4-hour course would turn into 16 hours because I'm
Dang.
writing every single note that and I never use those notes ever again.
Dang.
So it took me a while to actually get through the Code Academy stuff.
Yeah.
And then I got through it and I was like, I feel like I still don't really know how to code,
Yeah.
right? I don't know how to actually create
And that's
a web
real.
page.
I think a lot of people, the expectation piece is critical because when you're taking tutorials, the first time through, you're not going to necessarily understand everything that's going on. And it usually takes a bunch of times going through the same tutorial over and over again for you to start gaining mastery of a topic. What other tutorials or what else did you do in addition to that?
Yeah. So the next course that I did, which was I think the key course, was a Udemy kind of boot camp course. It was like a 40-hour course where they taught you HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then how to create how to actually create a website, how to link it to a database, how to upload it to GitHub, all of that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where I started to have a much better understanding. I think the Code Academy stuff was still helpful because it allowed me to cover the basics, but I shouldn't have taken all those notes. I should have just flown through it, gotten familiar with the concepts, and then gone into a more intense video online course.
Yeah. So then you felt like you were ready and you could start applying to coding bootcamp. So which coding boot camps did you apply to? Why did you apply to them? And how did that go?
Yeah, so initially I had only applied to Hack Reactor and Hackbright, actually, and I ended up having an interview with Hackbright, and they gave me a conditional acceptance.
Yep.
And I decided to drop out of my process with Hack Reactor and focus just on Hackbright, because it was 2 different languages, and I was like, I don't have time to learn 2 different languages.
Yeah.
So I focused on Hackbright, and they had given me some like supplemental coursework and had said, do this coursework, and then at the end you'll do another coding
Assessment.
coding challenge. Yeah. And then we'll give you your final result.
Yeah.
The supplemental coursework was super easy. It was all stuff that I had already done, and it was like the basics of stuff that I had done. So I was like, there is no way I'm not going to pass the final coding challenge.
Yeah.
And it was coming up to the time for the program to start. So I ended up purchasing a ticket to California. I found housing. I had quit my job, and I did the coding challenge, and I thought that I had done fine. And I end up finding out about a week before the program starts and a few days before I'm supposed to fly out to California that I wasn't accepted.
That's a scary moment. And like before going into, what happened when you found out that you weren't accepted, but you quit everything and are on your way to California, like San Francisco is an expensive place. Housing is hard to find. Let's unpack a little bit more about how you found housing, what the stakes were at the time, and why this was so alarming to you.
Yeah. So I was terrified. I was terrified for a bunch of different reasons. One, I had actually found out about this right before a birthday / going away party. Wow. It was an hour before people were supposed to come over to celebrate me leaving. So I'm like crying, and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to say to people. This is just so embarrassing. I feel stupid. Mm-hmm. But my best friend had come early, and my partner was there, and my mom was there, and they really kind of counseled me. And initially we actually almost canceled the party.
Wow.
My friend actually sent out a message saying to cancel it. And then I spoke on the phone with my mom, and she was like, no. She was like, don't cancel that thing.
Shout out to mom.
My mom was like, look, you're going to make it to California. She was like, you're going to figure it out. You're going to get there, have the party. Just know, it's going to work out. Mm-hmm. So,
she believed it.
So yeah. So we set the party. We had the party, and at the end I kind of told people things are up in the air. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. But when it comes to housing, I had listened to an episode that you guys did with Idaline Bobe, mm-hmm. and I had loved her episode. And so I had messaged her, this is months earlier. I had messaged her on Instagram just to say how much I loved her episode and how inspiring her story was. And then when it was time for me to look for housing, I posted in the Breaking Into Startups group, mm-hmm. and she commented on my post and offered me housing.
Wow.
And then when everything fell through with Hackbright and I wasn't sure what was going to happen, I reached out to her, and she was very understanding. She was very flexible, and she was like, look, just, we're here, we're waiting for you. We're supporting you, figure out, let us know when you can make it.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so shout out to Idaline, shout out to Rita, who was also on the podcast at the time as well, who mm-hmm. you were living with. And I think, you reached out to some people at that time. So you didn't get accepted. You did move out here, and, I think you got in touch with Timur I don't know how it happened, but there was something that we had to do in a week because you were ready to start. And
absolutely. Yeah. I'll break it down.
Yeah. Break it down.
So I think maybe the day after the party or something like that, I messaged Timur, and I think Timur, you could tell through our messages that I was kind of freaking out.
Yeah.
So you were like, Iris, let's just talk on the phone. So we ended up on the phone together, and you were basically like, look, things are going to happen on this journey, but you can still make it. You can still get through this journey. You gave me some examples and you gave me like a story, that was very encouraging. And you were just like, look, even though you're going to make it past this bump in the road, there are going to be more that are going to come.
Yeah.
And you should just know that. And I think you mentioned that you had to move like 7 times or something like that during.
I think for me, it was just coming from Ukraine to the States. And my parents didn't know English. I think they came with like $1,000 or $2,000 in the bank, and they had 2 kids. So I was like, just come out here, we'll make it work. Like, you speak English, you've already gone so far. Let's see what we can do to make it work.
Yeah. No, that conversation with you, I think was very important in helping me just push forward and keep going.